Hey everyone, this is my report on A Place of Their Own, Chapter 6. The assignment says to keep it brief, so I'm going to skip over some of my points, but you can view them all in my PowerPoint. So, this chapter is about the idea of a deaf state, and the concept would be that deaf people would be empowered by forming their own state in their own community. And this idea is majorly proposed by John J. Flournoy, someone who was seen as a bit crazy but also having some compelling ideas. First, this idea was responded by William W. Turner, one of Flournoy's teachers. He liked the idea, but overall felt it was impractical, especially the factor of exclusivity in Flournoy's plan, which said that hearing people would not be allowed. And this dialogue was made public, which sparked more dialogue to open up in the deaf community. And there are people such as Edmund Booth, John Carlin, P.H. Confer, and Laurent Clerc, who all commented on this matter with varying degrees of approval or disapproval. Edmund Booth disagreed with it. He was happy with his status in hearing society. John Carlin ridiculed the idea completely, and despite being deaf, he argued that deaf people were incapable of operating their own state. P.H. Confer loved the idea and offered to support $5,000, but the book points out that this person was very isolated and alone and ashamed of their deafness, and so perhaps their loneliness was part of their motivation to support this idea that would bring deaf people together. And the same can be said of Flournoy, because he also did not find acceptance like these other people and was isolated from a deaf community. And so perhaps their drive to form a somewhat extreme deaf community is from their loneliness and their desire to be among a deaf community that the other people mentioned in this already had in their lives. Laurent Clerc commented on this. We remember him from previous chapters. He's a very significant person, and he expressed a similar idea of deaf people coming together and being empowered by this. However, he stresses that his idea was not an exclusionist state like Flournoy's idea. So it's worth considering that while not all, but most of the recorded reactions to Flournoy's idea are negative, however, there might have been many uneducated deaf people who supported the idea, and we wouldn't have heard their voice because they were unable to write it because they were uneducated. So that is just something worth considering. Jane Elizabeth Groom had a similar idea, and she's from London, and she noticed that deaf people in London were struggling to compete with hearing people in a tight economy, and so she got financial and political support to bring deaf people to Canada, and they were able to get work and save up money there, and her idea was much more successful than Flournoy's, also partially because she did not exclude hearing people. And the book also points out that she, unlike Flournoy, she did not antagonize hearing people, but rather appealed to them because she was aware of how necessary their resources were, for better or for worse. So then at the end of this chapter, the author just makes a point about how strong the deaf community is at this point, because while the London community was, as the author puts it, pathetically making a plea for charity, the author also says that the American deaf community was demonstrating through this dialogue that they were assertive, aggressive, intellectual, educated people working in high positions. And yes, he stresses the importance of how strong the American deaf community is growing at this point. And that is the end of this chapter.